A desperate plea in the rain. The rain fell in relentless sheets, hammering against the windshield of Officer Daniel Carter's patrol car. It was nearly midnight, and most of the city was asleep. His shift was supposed to be ending soon, but something gnawed at him, an instinct he had learned to trust after years on the force. As he drove down the dimly lit residential street, his headlights sliced through the rain, illuminating two small figures huddled beneath a flickering street lamp. At first, Daniel thought they were stray animals, maybe a pair of dogs seeking shelter. But as he slowed, his breath caught in his throat. Two tiny children, a boy and a girl, barefoot, soaked to the bone, trembling. He pulled the patrol car over, his heart hammering in his chest. In his years as an officer, he had encountered many tragic situations, abandoned children, broken families, but something about this scene sent a chill down his spine. As he stepped out of the car, the icy rain immediately soaked through his uniform. He approached cautiously, not wanting to startle them. "Hey there," he called gently. "Are you okay?" The little girl clutched the boy's hand tightly. They both looked no older than 5, with identical round faces, dark eyes filled with fear, and curls plastered to their wet skin. The boy was shivering violently, his lips turning a shade too close to blue. The girl spoke first, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Officer, can you help us?" Daniel crouched down, trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. He could see now that their clothes were thin, too thin for a night like this. The boy's tiny feet were covered in mud. "Of course, sweetheart," he said, scanning them for any visible injuries. "Where are your parents?" The girl hesitated, glancing at her brother. He sniffled, rubbing his face with a small, trembling hand. "Mama told us to wait for her," she whispered, "but she never came back." Daniel's stomach twisted. "How long have you been out here?" She shook her head, unsure. "Did something happen to your mom?" he pressed, keeping his voice calm. The boy finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "She said she'd be back soon. But the door was locked, and we got scared." Daniel's blood ran cold. Locked out. A mother wouldn't just leave her children outside in this kind of weather. Something was very, very wrong. "Do you know where you live?" The girl nodded and pointed a trembling finger toward the end of the street. Daniel followed her gaze to a small, darkened house with a sagging porch. No lights. No movement. His instincts screamed at him. "Okay," he said, standing up. "Let's get you out of the rain first. I'm going to take you home, and we'll figure this out together, all right?" The girl hesitated. "We're not in trouble, are we?" Daniel's chest tightened. "No, sweetheart. You're safe now." He opened the back door of his patrol car, grabbing a spare blanket from the seat. As he gently wrapped it around them, the little boy let out a small, relieved sigh. They slid into the back seat, curling into each other for warmth. Daniel got into the driver's seat, turning the heat on full blast. He glanced at them through the rearview mirror. Their small hands were still clutching each other tightly, as if they were afraid that letting go would make the other disappear. As he pulled away from the curb, his mind raced with questions. Where was their mother? And why did he have this sickening feeling that she wasn't coming back? A house of secrets. The sound of rain drummed against the roof of the patrol car as Officer Daniel Carter drove slowly down the empty street. The two small figures huddled in the back seat under the warm blanket, their big, dark eyes peeking over the fabric. Daniel kept glancing at them in the rearview mirror, his mind racing. He had seen plenty of tragic cases before, but something about these twins, the way they clung to each other, the way their small faces were filled with silent fear, gnawed at him. They were just children, alone, abandoned. As he neared the house they had pointed to, his grip on the steering wheel tightened. The place looked like something out of a ghost story. A small, run-down house at the very end of the street, with boarded-up windows and a sagging porch. The wooden steps were warped from years of neglect, and the front door hung slightly ajar, swaying in the wind. Daniel turned to the twins. "Is this your home?" The girl nodded hesitantly. "Mama said to wait here." Something felt wrong. He parked the car and turned to face them. "Stay here for a second, okay? I'm just going to check if your mom is inside." The girl bit her lip, glancing at her brother before whispering, "Be careful." That simple warning sent a shiver down Daniel's spine. A dark, empty home. Hand resting on his holster, Daniel climbed the rotting porch steps. The rain had slowed to a light drizzle, but the eerie silence that hung over the house made his heart pound harder. He pushed the door open fully, the hinges groaning like a wounded animal. The moment he stepped inside, he was hit with a thick, musty smell. Mildew, damp wood, and something else. Something sour. The living room was a mess. A stained couch sat in the corner, its cushions torn open. Empty beer bottles and fast food wrappers littered the floor. A broken lamp lay on its side. The air was thick with the scent of cigarettes. This wasn't a home. This was a place of survival. His eyes scanned the walls, taking in the peeling wallpaper and old photographs. Faded pictures of the twins as babies were pinned to a corkboard. A single mother's handwriting marked the edges of a calendar. Reminders of bills, work shifts, and what looked like desperate notes about overdue payments. Daniel took a step forward when his foot hit something. A small teddy bear. He bent down, picking it up carefully. The fabric was worn, one of its arms barely hanging on. A child's toy. Forgotten. Abandoned. He exhaled slowly. His instincts screamed at him to be cautious. A chilling discovery. Moving through the house, Daniel reached the kitchen. The refrigerator door hung open, its shelves nearly empty except for a few moldy leftovers and a half-empty carton of milk. This wasn't right. Where was their mother? He turned down the hallway, following the damp scent. A single door at the end stood slightly ajar. His fingers tightened around his flashlight as he pushed it open. The room was dark. Daniel swept his flashlight across the space, and his breath caught. The bed was unmade, sheets tangled. Piles of dirty laundry sat in the corners. A woman's purse lay on the floor, its contents spilled out. A phone. He stepped closer, crouching down to pick it up. The screen was cracked, but still on, frozen on a single missed call notification from an unknown number. Then he saw it. A thin streak of something dark leading toward the closet. Blood. His pulse skyrocketed. Slowly, he reached for the closet handle. As he pulled it open, a musty scent filled the air. His flashlight illuminated a heap of clothes, and something beneath them. A shoe. A woman's shoe. His stomach twisted. Something had happened here, and it wasn't good. The twins' silent pain. Daniel stood up quickly, heart pounding. He needed backup. He needed to get the twins out of here. As he turned, he saw something in the doorway that made his breath hitch. The twins. The little girl and her brother stood there, their wide eyes locked onto his. They had seen the closet. They had seen the blood. Daniel knelt down, gently placing a hand on the girl's shoulder. "Sweetheart, do you know where your mom is?" he asked softly. Her lip trembled. She looked down at the floor, clutching her brother's hand even tighter. "She was crying before she left," she whispered. "She said she had to do something, but she never came back." Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. The little boy wiped at his eyes. "Mama said she'd come back for us," he whispered. "She promised." Daniel inhaled deeply, suppressing the anger bubbling inside him. Not at the mother, but at whatever had driven her to this point. Something terrible had happened here, and he wasn't leaving these kids alone for another second. Standing up, he pulled out his radio. "This is Officer Carter," he said, his voice steady but urgent. "I need immediate backup at 2304 Evergreen Street. Possible missing person. 2 abandoned minors. Situation unknown." The girl's small hand tugged at his sleeve. "Officer?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel knelt again. "Yeah, sweetheart." Tears welled in her eyes. Are we gonna be okay?" Daniel looked at them. Two tiny children who had been left to survive in a world that had already been cruel to them. He reached out and squeezed her little hand. "I promise," he said. "You're safe now, and I'm not going anywhere." But as he looked back at the darkened house, his gut told him this was just the beginning. Something, or someone, had taken their mother away. And Daniel was going to find out who. The search begins. The radio crackled as Officer Daniel Carter stood on the porch, shielding the twins from the cold wind. The eerie silence of the neighborhood, broken only by the distant wail of approaching sirens, sent a chill down his spine. "Dispatch, this is Officer Carter. I have 2 minors abandoned at the scene. Possible missing person. The house shows signs of distress, requesting immediate backup and forensic assistance." "Copy that, Carter. Units en route. Stand by." Daniel turned to the twins, their tiny faces pale against the dim glow of the street lamp. He crouched to their level, his voice gentle. "Sweethearts, I need you to stay here with me. My friends are coming, and they'll make sure you're safe." The little girl nodded, gripping her brother's hand so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel continued. She hesitated but then nodded again. "Do you remember when you last saw your mom?" The girl bit her lip. "She kissed us goodnight, but we heard her crying in her room after that. And then we woke up, and she was gone." Daniel's heart squeezed. The little boy finally spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was scared. She said she had to make things right." Make things right. Daniel's stomach turned. His gaze flicked back to the darkened house, the broken furniture, the blood on the floor. This wasn't a case of simple abandonment. Something had forced their mother to leave. And whatever it was, it had terrified her. Clues in the dark. The sound of sirens grew louder, but Daniel knew he couldn't wait. Every second counted. He turned back to the house. His flashlight flickered over the walls as he stepped back inside, retracing his steps. The kitchen was in disarray. A single unpaid electricity bill was stuck to the fridge with a worn-out magnet. A child's drawing of a smiling woman, probably their mother, was taped beside it. Daniel's eyes landed on the counter. A cell phone sat near the sink, the screen dim. It wasn't the same cracked phone he had found earlier in the bedroom. This one was still working. His heart pounded as he reached for it. One unread message flashed on the screen. It was from an unknown number. "Time's up. We warned you." Daniel's breath hitched. A sharp knock at the door made him whirl around. His backup had arrived. "The investigation begins." Sergeant Melissa Hayes stepped into the house, her keen brown eyes scanning the scene. Behind her, 2 officers began securing the perimeter, while a forensic team set up equipment. "Carter," Hayes greeted, her voice calm but firm. "What do we have?" Daniel handed her the phone. "Mom is missing. House shows signs of struggle." And this just came in. She read the message, her expression darkening. This wasn't just a disappearance. Daniel nodded grimly. The kid said she was scared. Said she had to make things right. Whatever she was involved in, she was desperate. Hayes turned to the forensic team. "Get prints, blood samples, everything. We need to find out what we're dealing with." Then she turned to Daniel. "What about the kids?" Daniel glanced outside. The twins sat in his patrol car, wrapped in blankets, watching the flashing lights with wide, scared eyes. "They've been through hell," he said, "and I promised them I'd keep them safe." Hayes studied him. "Then let's keep that promise." A dangerous connection. Daniel stepped outside, crouching beside the car. "Hey, little ones," he said softly. "My friends here are going to help find your mom. But I need to ask one more thing. Did she ever mention anyone? Maybe someone who scared her?" The girl clutched her bear. "She talked about a man." Daniel's pulse quickened. "What man?" The little boy whispered. "She said if he found her, he'd take everything away." A knot formed in Daniel's stomach. This wasn't just a missing person case. This was something far worse. And now, he was in the middle of it. A mother's secret. The night air was thick with tension. Flashing police lights cast eerie shadows on the pavement as officers combed the scene for evidence. The twins sat in Daniel Carter's patrol car, their tiny figures barely visible beneath the oversized blankets wrapped around them. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. She said if he found her, he'd take everything away. Those words echoed in his mind. Who was this he? And what was he after? Sergeant Hayes appeared beside him, her arms crossed. Forensics found blood, but it's mixed. Some of it belongs to the mother, but there's another unknown sample. We'll have results soon. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. I have a bad feeling about this. Hayes nodded. You're not the only one. Just then, an officer approached. Sir, we found something in the alley behind the house. Daniel and Hayes exchanged a glance before hurrying toward the alleyway. A battered brown purse lay discarded near a dumpster. The strap was torn, and its contents were scattered. Receipts, loose coins, an old grocery list. But one thing stood out. A torn business card, its edges smeared with dirt. Daniel picked it up and read the name. Richard Cole, loan specialist. A cold chill ran down his spine. Cole wasn't just any loan specialist. He was a shark, a ruthless collector who preyed on the desperate. Daniel clenched his jaw. She was in trouble with the wrong people. Hayes exhaled sharply. And if she owed Cole money, there's no telling what he did to her. A desperate mother's struggle. As they processed the scene, Daniel sat in the patrol car with the twins, his heart aching for them. Hey, sweetheart, he said softly, turning to the girl. Do you remember your mom ever talking about a man named Richard Cole? The little girl's face paled. Mommy called him the bad man. Daniel's chest tightened. Did she say why? The little boy spoke this time, his voice trembling. She borrowed money. She said we needed a safe place to stay, but the bad man wanted more money than she had. He kept calling her. She got really scared. Daniel felt a sinking feeling in his gut. This wasn't just about debt. Cole was the kind of man who didn't take no for an answer. And now, their mother was missing. He turned to the girl. Do you know where she could have gone? She hesitated before whispering. Mommy had a secret place. When she was sad, she took us there. Daniel's pulse quickened. Can you show me? The little girl nodded. The hidden shelter. With the twins bundled safely in the backseat, Daniel drove through the dimly lit streets, following their quiet directions. 10 minutes later, they pulled up to a small, run-down church at the edge of town. The paint was peeling, and the front steps were cracked. Daniel frowned. This is the place. The little girl nodded. Mommy said people who were lost could come here. Daniel's gut told him they were close. He stepped out of the car and knocked on the old wooden door. After a moment, it creaked open, revealing an elderly woman in a faded cardigan. Her sharp blue eyes studied him. Can I help you, officer? Daniel showed his badge. I'm looking for a woman named Naomi Carter. She has 2 kids. Have you seen her? The woman's expression tightened. I might have. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. Please, she's in danger. If you know where she is, I need to help her. The woman hesitated, then sighed. Come in. A cry for help. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and candle wax. The woman led Daniel to a small back room. On a worn-out cot lay Naomi Carter. She was unconscious, her face bruised, her arms covered in cuts. A damp cloth rested on her forehead, and beside her sat a half-empty bottle of painkillers. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. Naomi, he murmured, kneeling beside her. Naomi, can you hear me? Her eyes fluttered open. When she saw Daniel's uniform, she gasped and tried to sit up, but pain held her down. Please, she whispered, her voice raw. My babies. Where are my babies? They're safe, Daniel assured her. They're with me. But you need to tell me what happened." Tears filled her eyes. "He found me. I tried to run, but She winced, clutching her side. "Cole, he won't stop until he has what he wants." Daniel's jaw tightened. This wasn't just about money anymore. Cole had wanted to send a message. And now, Daniel had only one goal: to make sure Cole never got near this family again. The confrontation. Naomi's breaths were shallow, her body trembling from pain and fear. The dim glow of candlelight flickered against the aged wooden walls of the church's shelter. Daniel knelt beside her, his heart pounding in his chest. "Naomi, listen to me," he said softly, keeping his voice steady. "You're safe now. Your kids are safe. But I need to know everything. What did Cole do to you?" Tears welled up in her swollen eyes. She swallowed hard before whispering, He tracked me down. I don't even know how. I thought I covered my tracks." She coughed weakly. "I was trying to protect my babies." Daniel's hands curled into fists. He had dealt with criminals like Cole before, predators who thrived on fear, who pushed desperate people into impossible situations. "He told me if I didn't pay him back, he'd take something more valuable than money." Naomi continued, her voice shaking. "He said he'd take my kids." A cold fury burned in Daniel's chest. Naomi's battered face twisted in pain as she tried to sit up. "I had nowhere else to go. I thought, maybe if I hid long enough, he'd give up." Daniel's mind raced. If Cole was desperate enough to track her down, he wouldn't stop. And if Naomi was right, he might already know she was here. The threat that lurks in the shadows. Sergeant Hayes's voice crackled through Daniel's radio. "Carter, you there?" Daniel clicked the receiver. "Go ahead." "We pulled Cole's phone records. He's been calling an unknown burner number every few hours. And get this, his last call pinged just 3 blocks from your location." Daniel's stomach dropped. "He's close," he muttered. Naomi's eyes widened in terror. "Oh my God. He found us." Daniel shot up, scanning the room. The elderly shelter worker, Sister Agnes, must have noticed his alarm. "What's wrong, officer?" "Do you have any back exits?" he asked urgently. She nodded. "There's an old service door in the basement." Daniel turned to Naomi. "We need to get you out of here. Now." A deadly chase. He carefully helped Naomi to her feet, her body weak and unsteady. "I'll carry you if I have to," he said firmly. "No," she whispered. "I can do it." He led her down a narrow wooden staircase, the air in the basement cool and damp. The scent of aged books and candle wax filled the space. The service door loomed ahead, rusted but functional. Then, a loud crash upstairs. Naomi gasped. Daniel pulled his gun. "Go, get to my car. Lock the doors. Do not open it for anyone but me or another officer." She hesitated. "Go," he repeated. Naomi pushed through the service door, disappearing into the dark alley beyond. Heavy footsteps pounded against the floorboards above. Daniel pressed himself against the wall, his heart hammering in his chest. Then, a voice. "You think you can take from me and just disappear, Naomi?" "Cole." Daniel took a deep breath, gripping his gun. He had faced armed criminals, gangsters and killers before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a job. This was personal, face to face with the devil. Cole descended the stairs slowly, his bulky frame casting a long shadow in the dim basement light. His greasy blonde hair was slicked back, and a smug grin curled on his lips. Well, he drawled. "Who the hell are you supposed to be?" Daniel stepped forward, gun aimed squarely at Cole's chest. "NYPD, hands where I can see them." Cole scoffed. "Oh please, what are you gonna do, cop? Arrest me?" Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger. "That depends. Did you come here to kill Naomi?" Cole chuckled darkly. "No, I came to collect my property." Daniel's jaw clenched. "Naomi and her kids aren't your property." "That's where you're wrong," Cole sneered. "She owes me. And when people owe me, I take what's mine. Daniel took a step closer. You're not walking out of here free. Cole's smile faded. You know what your problem is, officer. Cole mused. You don't understand how the world works. Women like Naomi, they make bad choices. They take bad loans. And men like me, he smirked, we make sure the balance is paid. Daniel's blood boiled. You beat her, he said, voice low. You terrorized her. You threatened to take her kids. And now you're standing here like you own her life. Cole's smirk widened. I do own her life. Click. Daniel cocked his gun. Not anymore. Justice or revenge. For a split second, everything was still. Then, Cole lunged. Daniel fired. The bullet tore through Cole's shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground with a roar of pain. Daniel rushed forward, kicking the gun from Cole's grasp as he groaned in agony. You son of a... He pressed his knee into Cole's back, yanking his arms behind him. Richard Cole, you're under arrest for assault, extortion, and attempted kidnapping, Daniel growled. Cole spat blood onto the ground. You think a couple of charges will keep me locked up? Daniel leaned in close. You're going to rot in prison for a long time. And Naomi, she's finally free from you. Cole's laughter was bitter. We'll see about that. The sound of sirens filled the air. Daniel exhaled sharply. His hands trembled slightly as he fastened the cuffs around Cole's wrists. He had done it. He had saved Naomi and her kids. But deep down, he knew this wasn't over yet. Because even with Cole in custody, Naomi's battle wasn't just about one man. It was about starting over. And that was the hardest fight of all. A new beginning. The morning sun filtered through the large window of Street Agnes shelter, casting a soft glow on the worn wooden floors. The scent of fresh bread and coffee lingered in the air as the sound of soft footsteps echoed in the hallway. Naomi sat on the edge of a small cot, her fingers brushing over the bandages on her arms. Every inch of her body ached, but her heart felt a new, unfamiliar sensation. Hope. It had been a week since that terrifying night. A week since Officer Daniel Carter had saved her from Cole's wrath. A week since she had felt safe. Her twins, Malik and Micah, were still curled up in their blankets beside her. Their small chests rose and fell with each peaceful breath, something she hadn't seen in what felt like forever. For once, they weren't sleeping in fear. Naomi's gaze lifted when she heard footsteps approach. The door creaked open, and there stood Daniel, his uniform neatly pressed, but the exhaustion in his eyes undeniable. He carried a paper bag in one hand and a coffee cup in the other. You look better, he said with a small smile. Naomi chuckled softly. That's not saying much. I must have looked terrible before. Daniel shrugged, placing the bag and coffee on the nightstand. I've seen worse. She raised an eyebrow. Liar. He smirked but didn't deny it. Instead, he handed her the coffee. I got you something from that little bakery down the street. Figured you might be tired of shelter food. Naomi's fingers brushed against his as she took the cup, a simple gesture that sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. She stared at him for a moment before murmuring, "Why are you still here?" Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his short cropped hair. Because I care, Naomi, and because this isn't over. Her stomach twisted. Cole is still in jail, isn't he? Daniel nodded. For now. But guys like him, they have connections. His lawyers are already trying to work a deal. His jaw tightened. I won't let him hurt you again. Ever. Naomi swallowed hard. She wanted to believe that. But she had spent so many years running, so many years looking over her shoulder, that trusting in safety felt impossible. Daniel must have sensed her hesitation, because he sat down in the chair across from her, his voice gentle but firm. You don't have to do this alone anymore, Naomi. She shook her head, blinking back tears. I don't know how to live without fear. I don't know how to be free. Daniel leaned forward, his hands clasped together. Then let me help you figure it out. Rebuilding a life. The next few weeks were unlike anything Naomi had ever known. With Daniel's help, she was moved into a transitional home, not just another shelter, but an actual home, a modest two-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood. The first time she walked through the door, she had broken down in tears. It was the first real home she'd had in years. The boys started school for the first time. Malik had cried on the first day, clinging to Naomi's leg, terrified of being separated from her. Micah, the braver of the two, had promised to protect his brother. By the end of the week, they came home laughing, their backpacks filled with crayon drawings and stories about their new friends. And Naomi. She started therapy. For the first time, she spoke about everything: the abuse, the fear, the pain, and the guilt that weighed on her shoulders. Do you blame yourself? The therapist had asked her during one session. Naomi hesitated before whispering, yes. And then, for the first time, someone told her the words she had needed to hear for years. It was never your fault. Justice and redemption. Meanwhile, Daniel was fighting his own battle. Cole's case had gone to trial, and though his lawyers fought tooth and nail, the evidence was overwhelming. Naomi's testimony was damning, and so was Daniel's first-hand account of Cole's crimes. But the moment that sealed Cole's fate was when Malik and Micah took the stand. Daniel had been against it at first. He didn't want the boys to relive their trauma. But Naomi had made the decision. They need to know their voices matter, she had said. And when Malik, in his tiny, trembling voice, had looked the judge in the eye and said, "He hurt my mommy," the courtroom fell silent. Cole was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The moment the verdict was read, Naomi broke down in sobs, clutching Daniel's hand as relief flooded through her. For the first time in her life, the monster was gone. A new chapter. Months passed. Winter melted into spring, and with it, Naomi's world began to bloom. She got a job at a local community center, helping women who had lived through the same horrors she had. She shared her story, not with shame, but with strength. She stood in front of rooms full of survivors, telling them, "You are more than what happened to you. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of happiness." And Daniel, he was still there. He came by every Sunday to have dinner with her and the boys, who had affectionately started calling him Uncle Danny. He never overstepped, never pushed, but always made it clear that he wasn't going anywhere. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, Naomi sat beside Daniel on the small apartment balcony. The boys were inside, giggling as they played with their toy cars. "You saved me," she whispered. Daniel turned to her, his blue eyes soft. "No, Naomi, you saved yourself. I just helped you see that you could." A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time, it wasn't from sadness, it was from hope. Naomi reached out, her fingers lacing through his. For the first time in her life, she wasn't running. She wasn't afraid. She was home, the road to healing. 1 year later, the morning air carried the scent of fresh rain, and sunlight filtered through the windows of Naomi's apartment. The walls, once bare and cold, were now covered in bright paintings, some from local artists, but most from Malik and Micah, whose drawings of superheroes, rainbows, and their little family had taken over the fridge. A year had passed since Cole was sent to prison. A year since Naomi had taken her first steps toward freedom. And though the nightmares still came sometimes, though she still jumped at unexpected noises, she had learned something life-changing. Healing wasn't about forgetting. It was about learning to live without fear. She sat on the couch, sipping her coffee, watching as her boys played on the floor with their toy trucks. Micah's eyes lit up as he turned to his brother. "Malik, Uncle Danny's coming today, right?" Malik grinned. "Yeah. He promised he'd take us to the park." Naomi chuckled, setting her cup down. "You two see Daniel more than I do. You sure he's my friend and not yours?" The boys burst into laughter, and at that moment, the doorbell rang. Micah jumped up excitedly. "That's him." Naomi opened the door to find Daniel standing there, holding the small box. His uniform was replaced with a simple t-shirt and jeans, but he still had that protective presence about him, the kind that made her feel safe. "Good morning, ma'am," he greeted with a grin. Naomi rolled her eyes playfully. "You can drop the ma'am now, you know." He laughed, stepping inside. Maybe. Maybe not. The boys ran up, tugging on his arms. "Uncle Danny, did you bring it?" Daniel held up the box. "Of course. What kind of best friend would I be if I forgot?" Malik and Micah cheered as they took the box and rushed to the kitchen table, eager to open it. Naomi smirked. "What did you bribe them with this time?" Daniel shrugged. "Just a little something for their school project." Naomi crossed her arms, arching a brow. "And what about me? No bride for me." Daniel leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "What if I told you I have something for you too?" Naomi felt her stomach flip, but she quickly shook it off. "Oh yeah. What is it?" He pulled out an envelope from his pocket and handed it to her. Confused, she took it and opened it. Her breath caught in her throat as she read the first few lines. "Approved application for the Women's Empowerment Grant." Her hands trembled as she looked up at him. "Daniel, is this real?" He nodded. "It's real, Naomi. You did it." Tears welled up in her eyes. The grant was something she had applied for months ago, something that could help her turn her work at the community center into something bigger. A real program for women escaping abusive relationships, a safe haven for those who needed to rebuild their lives. And now, it was happening. Naomi blinked rapidly, trying to hold back the flood of emotions. I don't know what to say." Daniel smiled softly. "Say you're ready. Because, Naomi, you've been fighting for this for a long time. And now you get to help others do the same." She let out a shaky breath before throwing her arms around him, hugging him tight. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a survivor, turning pain into purpose. In the weeks that followed, Naomi poured herself into the new project. With the grant money, she helped expand the community center, transforming it into the Phoenix House, a place where women and children could find refuge, therapy, legal aid, and a fresh start. She held workshops, sharing her story with others who needed to hear that there was hope. She visited shelters, offering job assistance, emotional support, and a shoulder to lean on. And with every woman who walked through those doors, Naomi saw a piece of herself. The broken mother, the scared wife, the woman who thought she had nowhere to go. She told them all the same thing. You are more than what happened to you. You are stronger than you know. And with every success story, Naomi felt a little more whole. The unexpected question. One evening, as Naomi finished closing up the Phoenix House, she found Daniel waiting for her outside. He leaned against his car, arms crossed, looking at her with that easygoing smile. "Busy day?" he asked. She sighed, stretching her arms. "You have no idea, but a good one." He nodded. "I can see that. You're happier, Naomi." She hesitated before responding. "Yeah, I think I am." Daniel took a deep breath, looking suddenly nervous. "Listen, I've been meaning to ask you something." Naomi tilted her head. "What is it?" He hesitated, then let out a short chuckle. "You know I've been in your life for a while now, and I'm not going anywhere." Her heart started pounding. "Naomi," he said, his voice softer now, "would you ever consider giving us, a chance?" For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. The idea had crossed her mind before, but she had always pushed it away. After everything she had been through, she never imagined herself opening up again. But with Daniel, it was different. He had been patient. He had never pushed. He had given her space to heal, but he had also never let her feel alone. She swallowed hard. "Daniel, He held up his hands quickly. "No pressure, Naomi. I just needed you to know that I care about you, not just as a friend, but as someone who admires everything you are." Tears pricked her eyes. "I'm scared." He stepped closer, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Then we go slow. No rush. No expectations. Just us." She exhaled shakily, searching his face for any trace of doubt. But there was none. Only warmth. Only love. And for the first time, Naomi let herself hope. She took a deep breath and whispered, "Okay." The road ahead. The journey wasn't over. Healing wasn't a straight path. It had twists and turns, moments of doubt, and moments of triumph. But Naomi knew one thing for sure. She wasn't walking it alone anymore. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving. She was truly living.